25th call workshop with the city of Rockport. The cover sheet on here talks about folks that want to be heard and so forth. If you're among those folks, there was paperwork that needs to be in. It won't be addressed again. We'll have roll call to establish presence of a quorum. Ward 1. Here. Ward 2. Here. Ward 3. Here. Ward 4. Here. Mayor here. We do have a quorum. First item on the agenda, tax increment reinvestment zone. City manager.
Okay. If you guys will remember early on, not too long after I got here, it's probably been a year ago now, we had Travis come and talk about the tax increment reinvestment zone, and he will send Travis James, he'll introduce himself when he gets up, but we talked about implementing something for the downtown to put some capital back into the downtown area to get some of the projects that we need going down there. And now's the time to execute on that. So you'll hear from Travis about the actual TIRZ that we are going to be asking you to consider. And then Scarlett Olson has a project that she's considering downtown, and she'll tell you about that and the status. And then I think we're going to hear from John Jackson and Luis. So that and who? And Tom? Yeah. Okay, so we have some kind of strict time limits just because we have another meeting. But so I'm going to turn it over to Travis and ask questions as we go, council. Okay.
Get the show on the road if you're ready. So it's good to see some familiar faces. I'm Travis James. I'm with a firm named TXP. We're actually based out of Austin. We do public policy consulting work all over the state, out of the state, legislative studies. I've worked on many TIRZ, successful TIRZ throughout the state. And so I'm going to give a presentation for I think there's a couple new folks, and some of you folks are hearing this for the second time, so please interrupt me. So I'm going to go over high level how the TIRZ works, how a lot of communities would implement a TIRZ, and then you'll hear some specifics about projects people are looking at. So I'm a resource here. I'm here representing the city, working on behalf of the city. I don't work for a developer. I'm not working for anybody on this one. So a tax increment, yeah, it has to be active. Okay, there we go. So what is a tax increment reinvestment zone? So you hear two terms used interchangeably. You hear tax increment financing, and you hear tax increment reinvestment zones. And communities use those terms interchangeably. The statute is called tax increment financing, and under that you create a geographic zone. So all tax increment financing means, in short, is future revenue you generate in the zone, you dedicate to the zone to pay for projects. Instead of going to the general fund, you agree to put future revenue above what you're collecting today in the zone to pay for projects. In the tax increment reinvestment zone, you typically collaborate with, say, the county or the NAT district. Everybody but the school district can participate, and they can agree to also put their future property tax revenue in the zone to pay for projects. So they're typically put in place for 20, 25 years. I'll go over some examples. But so again, you'll hear these terms. If you look at other communities, TIF and TIRZ are used interchangeably. On the next slide, I'll just tell you this. Once you go to the next slide, if you don't mind pointing out about that.
When you talk about designating the funds that come out of this area, is it predominantly property tax? Is it
predominantly property tax? And it'll be property tax on real property, not personal property. Because the real property is going to be your land and your buildings, your personal property, machinery, equipment, inventory. So by law, it's just real property. So your land and your buildings. Cities can choose to put a portion of their sales tax in. Some do, some don't. That gets into the specifics of what you're trying to accomplish. So what this tells you, when you create your zone's going to have a base value. And let's just say the zone's worth $1 million. Let's just say we draw a circle around downtown, let's go back, it's worth $1 million. All the tax revenue you generate off the $1 million goes to the general fund like the TIRZ never existed. Let's say you have new projects and it grows to $10 million. Well, your tax base increment is $9 million, right? Your base was 1, you built a new project worth 9. So the revenue you generate off that 9, all or a portion of it, you can dedicate to that geographic zone. So you can say we'll put 50% in. So 50%, I don't know, am I making that change by the my hand? Okay. So we follow this, the base would be 1 million in this example. That's the value of downtown. As the value grows, anything above the 1 million value in the taxes you generate, all or a portion of that you dedicate to the zone. Does that make sense to everybody? I don't mind repeating, it's kind of hard to get your head around. So let's say downtown's worth $1 million, and someone builds a $10 million project on the old HEB site. The value of downtown is now $11 million. The increment is $10 million because the base was 1. So off that $10 million, the property taxes you generate, the county, generates, the NAV district may generate, you can say we're going to keep 50% of it in downtown to pay for projects. I'll go over what projects could be in the downtown. Does that make sense to everybody? So that's how it works. So the revenue you're getting today kind of stays like nothing's happening. Future growth, all or a portion of that you can dedicate to the zone. On the next slide, I think what's important to remind folks, there is no tax increase. So it's whatever the tax rate you're using, your tax rate goes up and down like every community. So we use that $10 million example, whatever your tax rate is, you take the $10 million divided by 100, multiply it by your tax rate, that's the taxes you're generating or the county is generating. Cities commonly create them, they can be generated. They can be created by a petition of your property owners, but again, there's no tax increase. It doesn't impact a tax property owner. They don't do anything extra. The mechanics are, let's say you created this zone, the city would send it to the appraisal district. Here's the ordinance creating it. Here's a list of all the properties in the zone, and they help you keep track and do the math. So a property owner doesn't have to do anything. Doesn't impact what they're paying for, doesn't impact their services. This is just a way typically cities, counties, different tax and jurisdictions come together. So I hope Victoria put one in place, and that's a combination of that's the city coming together, the county, and then their community college district. In other places like Brownsville, they have a port that decided to join. So depending on where you live and what your property jurisdictions are, most common the city, county, school districts can participate, but at First and Robin Hood, if you follow that complicated process, so they technically can participate, they don't because it hurts them financially. So I sometimes say school districts can't, they can, they just choose not to because it hurts them with their funding. On the next slide, go back to the money. So what can you spend the money on? You can acquire properties, you can spend money on public works, infrastructure, sidewalks, utilities, facade grant improvements. You can use professional service firms if you need to hire an engineering firm to help you with figuring out the drainage in downtown. So I say a lot of the things you're typically doing for economic development, there's a long list: preservation of the facades, demolition of property. So there's a long list of things people spend it on. It's most common either economic development grants to a project or reimbursing people for infrastructure. So that's a very common one. Is the developer comes in and says, hey, I got to extend the sewer line. The city says, I don't have the money. The city says, okay, here's a TIRZ. You pay for it, you put it in, and we'll reimburse you from your property taxes that go to the zone. Right, so the risk is on the project to both build it and build their project so they can get repaid. Does that make sense? So if they just built the water line but never built the building, then there is no money to repay them. So these are typically at risk to the developer to get reimbursed. And I'll give you a couple of examples. You can pay for financing costs, real property assemblage costs. I said professional services, organization costs. So one thing that is common is that as you have city staff spend time on this, you can reimburse your staff time from the TIRZ. So in cities that have a lot of them, they may have a dedicated tip or TIRZ person. They typically will reimburse the city, kind of an internal accounting exercise. So does that make sense? You designate a zone, you're going to put all or a portion of the future tax growth in the zone to pay for projects that are outlined in your project plan.
Is it an all or majority of the property owners in the zone have to agree to this, or is that just no?
No, so if it's a petition of the landowners, it's got to be more than 50% of the assessed value. county. So typically it's created by the city, and then the county joins just due to how cities and counties can issue debt. It's a little bit easier. So what's most common is the city creates it, or having conversations, let's just say with the NAB district or with the county, so they know what's going on, and they typically will join through what's called the development agreement. Simple contract that says, we'll agree to be in your, if your TIRZ is for 20 years, we agree to be in it for 20 years with you. If it's for 10 years, we agree to be in it for 10 years. So it's a simple contract that says, we agree to participate, and they would get a board member. So what are some examples of what these look like? If you're familiar with Las Colinas, we talked about this last time, Las Colinas in Irving, that's a massive TIRZ. Lots of landowners, lots of projects. Lands come and go. That thing's been around for 20, 30 years. That's a common one. If you've been to the Puron in San Antonio, the Broadway corridor in San Antonio has one. So one way they incentivize all of that new housing that you see that got built, they use the TIRZ to give those residential projects an incentive to build residential near the Puron. So Las Colinas is a really big one. The Broadway is a corridor, lots of corridor examples. And so you don't have one, this wouldn't push you over the threshold, but just you can't have too many of these that take up too much of your property tax base. Does that make sense to everybody? So those are two of the rules. So no, you can't have too much residential, and then you can't, depending on your population, you can't have too much of your tax base tied up in TIRZ or multiple TIRZ. Feel free to stop me if I'm going too quick, and I'll come back and answer questions. These are the 7 steps you have to follow. So if you said, hey, we want to go create this thing tomorrow, what do we have to do? You have to create a preliminary project and finance plan. You have to publish a hearing. You have to post the ordinance. You have to have a public hearing, and then you create it. That ordinance will tell you the number of years and how big the zone's going to be, and that you did create a plan and you do think it's feasible that this is going to work. You then create a board. So there's a board of directors. Got to have a minimum of 5 people, no more than 15. This is set by state law. Every participating taxing jurisdiction gets at least 1 board member. So let's just say the NAB district and county agreed. You'd have city folks on it, You have at least one person from the county. You would, in theory, have at least one person from the NAD district, because if they join, they're guaranteed to get one spot. Does that make sense to everybody? Once you do that, the board meets. You then have to create what's called the final project and finance plan. It's similar to this one, but it has more detail. It talks about what the eligible projects are: sidewalks, streets. You can make it broad, which is common in a downtown, but if you're working with one developer who has a very clear plan and at very clear cost, you may say, we only want to reimburse you for your water. So that would be the only eligible expense. Or we only want to reimburse you for sidewalks. If you don't list it as an eligible project, then you can't reimburse them for it or spend money on it. You can always amend these plans. Better to get it right the first time. So most communities have the eligible projects be a sort of a broad list of what you're allowed to pay for. Does that make sense to everybody? So we don't know exactly what's going to be needed, let's just say in a downtown area. Once you do that, you collect your increments. The board of directors makes recommendations. So what's most common is someone would bring a project to the TIRZ board. TIRZ board says we like it, we support it, and then it would come back to city council, and then you all would have to agree to fund it.
Is that board of directors is usually staff that's appointed there, or one of the elected officials?
Okay, done both ways.
Okay.
I would say don't put someone who has a conflict who's going to ask to get funded, because then they have to recuse themselves. It's either city council members or just community members in the importance of downtown. There are state rules about who's eligible. You have to live in the county or be a representative of a property owner if you don't. But it's mostly going to be citizens of Rockport or council members who choose to be on it. The other taxing entities, they would get to appoint whomever they want. They could appoint a county commissioner. They could just appoint a citizen of the county.
Gotcha.
So, you know, in small communities, it's not uncommon for council people to sit on it. In really big cities where they have lots of boards and it's too hard to show up at everything they do, just appoint a citizen who they think understands downtown, understands their interests. And you do it that way. All the meetings are public. There'd be some version of this. Someone has to take notes. You have to post minutes. You do have to do an annual report to the comptroller. And I can send this to Vanessa. You know, there's hundreds of TIRZ throughout Texas, and if you look at what's called the comptroller's biennial report, so every 2 years they prepare a list of all the tax increment reinvestment zones and all the different entities that participate and at what level. So you can skim through it and see who's doing what. It's just a PDF, it's not a map, but there's lots of folks that do this. So does that make sense? So the first thing you say, yes, let's do it. You agree to the zone. And then you have an ordinance that says, you know, this is the zone defined by these parcels or defined by however we're going to define it. And then you go through this process. So let's just say you created a TIRZ this year. 24 is the base value. That locks in, if you remember that graphic that said this is the floor. So to have any money go to the TIRZ, we've got to grow the base above that value. The first year will be 25. Right, because 24 is the base year. We've got to create it this year to lock in 24. Our first year of growth will be in 25. Everyone clear? So we put nothing in for 24. We see how things grow in 25. You take the difference. You know, you figure out the tax rate and you contribute that to the zone. Those taxes are not due until January 31st of 26. So it does take time for this to build up increments. So I say to communities, this is a tool. This is not the end-all be-all. A lot of developers and a lot of people use a TIRZ because they're comfortable with it. People know how it works, but you just have to put it in place to have it be available for if and when you want to use it. Does that make sense? So that's how a lot of people think of these in a downtown. We think we want to use it. We just got to go ahead and put it in place so we can start capturing that increment. So for the first year, the board may meet one time, right? Because you may have no money. Or very, very little money. So it's not maybe the best board to be on that first year because you may get 15, 20 grand, pick whatever you're gonna get. So it just does take time. So let's just take a downtown TIRZ. What would make sense? So I was Brian, what would kind of make sense for a TIRZ? So you have, I'll just refer to it as the old HEB property to the north, coming down Magnolia over to the water, kind of the core of downtown as I think of downtown. I mean, you could adjust this. There is no perfect. This is just to get it started. This includes NAD district property, the Bass family's property. This is what it looks like. Remember I said you can't have too much residential in that zone, you can't have more than 30%. These are state land use codes. I'm waiting to get some data back from the appraisal district, so I pulled this by hand. This A1 is residential. C, the way they have it coded, is commercial property that's vacant. Commercial residential, it's a combination. EX means there's two kinds of exemptions, which means they don't pay property. So like the NAD district property shows up in this blue color. Right? Churches will typically show up, or nonprofits. The art center shows up as X. So you have to take into account they have a value, but from a tourist perspective, they don't generate revenue. So that's what these EX, X. They have a code for W, which is taxable waterfront. That's what the pink is you see. F1 is going to be commercial. F2 is industrial. You don't have any industrial in downtown. Super high level, just to kind of give you a sense of the process to see, how much undeveloped land do we have? How much residential do we have? You may say, hey, we're interested. We want to bump it 2 blocks to the west. There's no right or wrong. I just did this for illustrative purposes for tonight.
If we choose to create one of these, does it have to be contiguous like that, or can we, if we're going to go to all this trouble, can we put 2 of them in the city of Rockport? If we're going to go through all this, if we can identify.
Sure. They don't have to be contiguous. I would say a best practice is if you think you need 2, because you may have very different project plans and very different kinds of development.
Can they have different?
Correct. So let's just say there's an industrial part of town where you think we only want to put 25% in. Well, downtown, you may say we want to put 50% of the revenue in. You got to have the same revenue for the TIRZ, no matter how big it is. So what's more common is if you think there's one that's in another part of town that may be industrial, you would create an industrial, an industrial TIRZ, and then you would have a downtown TIRZ. 2 different boards, 2 different project plans, maybe serving 2 very different purposes. But what I would say is, at least for downtown, if you like a downtown TIRZ, let's make sure you get it right. You can add property to a TIRZ over time, but let's just say the city, county, NAD district come together, we like it. If you want to add property, you have to go back to the process of asking them to expand theirs as well. So I think in general, it's easier to spend the time to get it right the first time. There's just less sort of paperwork and legwork. So you have time. So W waterfront, and then X. There's 2 exempt properties. That's the art center. I have to remember what.
The other one's the depot.
The depot, that's what it is, the depot, yeah. So those are 2. So what does that mean when I talked about base? So if you remember these codes over here, and I'll label these better, but here are those codes. Here's the number of parcels, so sort of the number of accounts. Think of a parcel as a property, the number of acres. And then I have the preliminary 2024 values. As y'all know better than I do, 24 has not been certified. So these are the preliminary values in the appraisal district. So people can fight their values and protest their values. So these aren't the certified final values, but these are a good point. Remember I told you the exempt have no taxable value? That's why you see the zeros. Makes sense to everybody how this sort of table, so this would be your base. If you said we love it, we don't want to make any changes, the preliminary values equal to certified values, 29 million and change is your base value. I love the fishbowl anyway. So again, the simple way to think about the calculation is take the taxable value, let's say 2030, it's 50 million. So it's 50 million minus the base value of 29 million, so that's about $21 million of additional, taxable value. Divide it by 100, you multiply it by the tax rate, and then you multiply it by the percent you want to give to the TIRZ. Whatever you give to the TIRZ goes to the TIRZ, whatever you keep goes to general funds. If you say, look, we feel comfortable going 50-50, you may say we feel comfortable 75-25, you may say 30-60. I mean, you get a pick what you feel comfortable with, and you can change that, but once you enter into those interlocal agreements with the city and the county and the other folks, it gets a little bit more challenging to kind of make these tweaks. So what's most common is to pick the number you want, and that's what you stick with, at least for the short term, and see how things grow. So does that make sense? So again, the idea is you create this is called your tax increment reinvestment zone. And so cities either name them after the area of town, or they get really exciting and say TIRZ number 1, TIRZ number 2. But most common is you would call this, TIRZ number 1 downtown Rockport. And then if you had a TIRZ number 2, industrial zone, Rockport, or whatever you would need. So in places like San Antonio and Houston, they have 20 and 30 of these. So they typically use a number and then they give it a name so a citizen understands, okay, that's Brooks Air Force Base, the old Brooks Air Force Base downtown, or Houston Street in San Antonio would be one, or Austin Waller Creek. If you don't know where Waller Creek is along I-35, that has a TIF to pay for flooding and drainage. So you create the zone, you would say we're going to put it in place for 25 years, and we're going to agree to give it 50% of the revenue above and beyond the base. And then you're sort of off to the races, but you still have to finish these 7 steps. So preliminary plan is the first thing that says, hey, we're saying as the city, we think this makes sense and is feasible. Got to publish in public notice in the newspaper. You have an ordinance that legal creates. Takes y'all 2 readings, right, to approve things. So you typically have on consent the second time. You designate the board. You appoint the board. There are bylaws that the board has to follow. The board approves the final plan. Then that plan comes back to city council for approval. So it does take time, right? It's a process. And then your TIRZ is ready to spend the money if and when, an eligible project comes to you. So I know I covered a lot and I repeated things because it takes time to get your head around some of these concepts, but the key being, do you want to create a downtown TIRZ? What boundary generally makes sense? And then you have to do the project plan, the preliminary plan, identify the percent you want to contribute. And at the same time, have those conversations with the county, the NAD district. Those would be the 2 to say, hey, are you interested in coming along? How do we build and grow downtown Rockport? There's far more need than there is money, right? This isn't going to solve all your problems. So just to be clear, this isn't going to be a panacea that could pay for every project downtown. But what it does say is we have a dedicated pot of money that's going to be generated on future growth in the zone that's going to be dedicated to improve this part of the community. And hopefully the county NAV district come along so we have more money to spend together. So you're not having to go back to every board every time. You kind of have this body put in place that all agrees downtown matters, and we want to focus some of those resources on downtown.
You touched on at the beginning on if there's a development or something that we know is coming down the pipe, that the debt goes, or the borrowing capabilities on the developer, the TIF tiers would reimburse them.
Correct.
Down the road. Can the tiers issue debt?
It can, so you'd have to first say that that's an eligible way to finance things. And in some communities, they choose not to go down that route. Others say, yeah, we'll put it in there as an option, but you are absolutely not obligated to do it. So my recommendation would be listed as a possibility, so you don't have to change it. You would not issue debt until you generated enough revenue to make that debt payment. Okay. So you would work with your financial advisor. So let's just say there's a bond payment of $1 million. They may say, hey, look, until you're generating $1.5 million to $2 million a year, we don't recommend you issue debt. Because property values, as we all know, do go up and down, right? They spike and now they've come down a little bit. So they're like, let's just make sure we got enough coverage ratio, right? The term, so we don't get caught short. But yes, that is a common way to do it. Often because it's cheaper for cities to issue debt than developers. And so oftentimes your agreement to, let's say, developers will pay you back with interest. And if their interest is 7% and you can borrow money at 3%, it may be cheaper for you to go issue debt, right, and pay them off because your interest rate is lower. In other situations, it may not be that big of a project. It's just $2 million. It's probably not worth the cost to issue the debt. It's just cheaper to just pay them off.
Is the risk there for the city then if the development doesn't make?
Correct.
Is the city or the entity issuing the debt is on the hook for the debt?
Correct. So the most common way would be, I'm going to build a neighborhood and I'm going to pay for all the sewer, the streets, the sidewalks, I'll build ball fields, I'm going to do all of this for you, you just pay me back. Well, if they never build a project, then you're not on the hook. The bank goes after that. And so this is performance based, and so you're not going to give people money up front. Some cities will pay for things up front, but at least from this mechanism says you got to build it, you got to generate the increment, and we pay you back with what you generate. But we're not on the hook for reimbursing you unless you build your project. Is that?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
What else? Any other questions or?
I guess the reasoning that we would consider doing something like this is we're trying to make an area that we've determined attractive for developers and what have you to come in here and look at getting reimbursed on some things. Is this advertised or is there an available TIRZ list for developers as people are looking around Texas and looking at great communities?
Right.
How are we going to get the word out on there? Or is it just up to us to mention it to a developer when they contact? That may be a Jeff question.
Well, it's a little bit of both. I mean, there is a list that people look at. Most of the time, developers know you create this. You are marketing. When people are coming in, you're saying, hey, we have this tool available. You got to be eligible. You got to still make sure the city, county, they still want to support you. But we do have a tool in place, so you don't have to go through the process. It takes 6 to 9 months to put one of these in place. It just saves them time, and time is money. So they can come to you and say, hey, I'm interested in the old HEB site. This is my concept. This is what the revenue I think is going to generate is. Are y'all willing to help me pay for things? And so you're marketing it, but then people will find out about it.
Okay, it just shows that we're receptive to certain types of projects, and we put some things in place to assist developers.
So let me answer a question you haven't asked, but that you will. What's the downside? So the downside is you go through the staff time, you spend some time creating this, and nothing happens.
Nobody bites.
Nobody bites, nothing grows, there's no new value. Then that TIRZ account has no extra money because your base stays at 29 million. You follow me? That's the downside. You spend some time, some money, putting this thing in place, and nothing happens. That's kind of the downside. That's typically the downside you would experience. People may say, oh, why'd you go through all this hassle and spend some money to create this thing if you never got anything to happen? Now the onus is on the economic development folks, the city, the real estate professionals to help cause things to happen in the downtown.
Is there any data you mentioned 10 projects around the state. Is there any data out there? Okay, in 2021, there was 63 of these established in the state of Texas, and 3 have nothing, and the other, is there any data showing how popular these are?
Not on that. You would have to manually look to see how much, the way the comptroller gives it to you, it's a PDF. So you have to kind of compare them one at a time. I think most of them get
If you had to guess on a failure rate on these, who? I'd
probably say 75% perform. I mean, I think a failure is we did a TIRZ, nothing ever happened, and I call them zombie TIRZ. So what sometimes happens, and I help communities clean these up. I won't say the cities.
So they exist.
They get through this part and never get around to appointing the board. So they legally exist once you approve it on second reading, but no one's really managing it, no one's promoting it, and I call those a zombie TIRZ. Those do exist. Look, after 5 years, if nothing's happening in this TIRZ, you can always get rid of it. You can say, hey, we're going to shut the TIRZ down, it's not working, we don't think it's worth the effort, and whatever money it collects goes back proportionally to the entities that participated. So let's say there was $100, you may get $40, the county gets 30, then that district, everyone gets whatever money they contributed back.
So if we choose to do it for 25 years and it just doesn't work, we can eliminate it in 5 years and do something else.
Or if it's really successful and you build the projects and you pay everything off and you want to free up the money for the general fund, you can let it expire or get rid of it. So let's say you have some projects to come in and you only need 10 years to give them a reimbursement, and I say shut it down at the end of 10 years. A lot of these projects are probably going to need 20 years, just depending on who knows on the infrastructure and the cost. Other cities may say, no, let's keep it in place because we want to fix drainage on hospitals. There's all kinds of ways communities use these. But you could extend it, you could shut it down fast. When there's a single developer, what's common is, hey, we're going to reimburse, we'll pay you back for 25 years. If you don't make your money back after 25 years, that's on you. Or there's a cap. So let's say we pay the developer back in 17 years, then it would just terminate in 17 years because there aren't any other projects. Mm-hmm. That makes sense? So it kind of varies depending on, I'm sorry.
Oh, I just want to clarify. So you say you do it 25 years, do we have to put wording in there that after 5 years and we're not seeing progress, then we would have to make sure that we're being very careful on how we're wording this contract and making sure that
Correct.
gonna make that happen the way we
Sure.
want it to be structured.
Mhm.
Like in every 5-year review, if this is not
Correct.
doing what it's doing, then we can cancel it and get out. I
Correct.
think that's what you're more saying, right?
Yes.
Just wanna make sure.
Yeah, so it's not as common in a downtown, because once you do a deal with someone that may be a 20-year term, and you can't close it down early, that is more common when it's just one developer on one, I think Town Creek and New Braunfels, it's one developer, and you may say to them, look, if you don't break ground 3 years, your deal's done, and we're terminating this thing. It's less common in a downtown just because of how many property owners you have. They can take a little bit of time, but sure, you should definitely stay on top of this.
Because with this one as an example, we're hoping for 6, 8, 10 projects or
Correct.
something like that. So,
Correct.
so the sunset or the opportunity to terminate with this one project thing probably won't exist in this
Correct.
example.
But on an industrial one,
Yeah.
you say, hey, the person that's gonna put in the horizontal utilities and then sell the site, you gotta break ground, and that's not common. I had one in Corpus Christi that was worded that way. They said, look, you have a certain amount of time where you gotta get going, or this thing terminates. We're not gonna just have this thing sitting out there forever.
Historically, how are small businesses affected by these zones?
I mean, they're not affected because their tax rate stays the same. I mean, they would typically like them if they work, because you're bringing in new businesses and new people to frequent their.
It's going to revitalize their area.
Correct.
And the infrastructure would improve.
And the infrastructure would improve. Yes, properties do get more valuable in theory because they have more business. So, I mean, it works hand in hand. If you improve an area, the property values in theory do go up, but you've now attracted more people down there to frequent their shops, their restaurants, and those kinds of things. But there's no burden on them because they don't have to do anything other than just pay their property taxes, on time.
You touched on the school districts participating or not participating due to Robin Hood. If this is a valued at 29 and some change, 2024, but in the 10 years, a project that's come along and now it's 60 million.
Sure.
School district not participating, they're going to be their total valuation is going to be at 60, correct?
Right.
So that would
Potentially
hurt us in that Robin Hood, right? Because this isn't going to have students.
I don't know, does Rockport receive money from the state?
No, we write big checks.
Okay, Sam and Austin, right, we get a ton of you would just give more away, but it's that whole individual people formula kind of way. So it doesn't impact them. Where it does help you is if they ever did want to issue debt for new schools, they have a higher tax base to issue debt against.
We just did that.
Right, but that's not subject to recapture, right?
Okay.
Just on the M&O side. So it doesn't have a material impact on.
So if we are a community that pays a lot into Robin Hood,
You're going to continue to pay a lot to Robin Hood.
it wouldn't help the school district.
You're just going to keep giving, except when you issue debt, right? Now you have a bigger base to issue debt against on that side. But no, that's the same in Austin. We get these semiconductor fabs. AISD doesn't get to keep. I mean, and that's down in the weeds on school finance. Like I said, that's my general understanding. So I mean, it may be a few dollars here or there, but I mean, that's a school finance and what the legislature does or doesn't do. I have probably taken longer than I should have. Do you want me to keep going with this or turn it over to somebody? Or do y'all have any more questions? I mean, I'm going to stick around for sure, but do you want me to pass the baton?
How many speakers? We got 4 that have.
So Scarlett, I've asked her to keep hers under 10 minutes, and I've asked John and Luis to keep it under 5, and we'll apply the same thing to Tommy if that's okay. So you've got 10, 15, 20, 25 minutes. You want to take a quick break?
We can do that if anybody needs to go powder your nose or something like that. We can get back in here, but we need to probably cut the questions down until we've given everybody a chance to speak, and then we can go back and do what we can then. But we've got a council meeting in 45 minutes.
Or go ahead. Guys, keep going. Okay, keep going? Okay. Okay, so Travis is talking about a developer bringing in a project, and Scarlett has just such the project that she wants to talk to us about. Scarlett Olson? Scarlett Olson Embrey, yeah. She can tell you the rest about herself. Yeah.
And I want to make sure this is working. Let's see. Do I click right here?
Yes,
Okay.
that should.
All right. So, Mayor and City Council members and community, thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. So, my name is Scarlett Olson Embrey, and I live in Rockport full-time. I grew up in San Antonio, but spent my time in Rockport with my family during the summers, weekends, and holidays. Rockport is where my heart was and is to this day. I call it my happy place. In this photo, you can see my family's old beach house, built back in 1973. I was born in 79, so it was there before I was born. My parents designed and built this house, and the house has not been in my family for years, but it is one of the original homes that is still standing today. I had always wanted to move to Rockport as a kid, and eventually I made it here. My husband, Doug Embrey, and I moved here part-time a few years ago, and now we call Rockport our full-time home. The reason I am telling you this is because I'm standing here before you because of my love of Rockport. I'm a business owner and real estate developer, but at the heart of all of the business stuff, I am actually an artist and a musician. I love the culture, the history, and natural beauty of this place, which is what draws my heart to be here and to be a full-time member of this amazing community. Doak and I live in South Rockport with our 3 Boston Terriers, and we enjoy walking downtown for our morning and evening walks. We're in the real estate business, and while looking for a property to develop a few years ago, we noticed the harborfront properties and started talking about our vision for what an amazing property the future of Rockport. As it turned out, there were many developers that tried and failed to develop this property over the past 30 years since the land has been vacant. Some development plans were turned down by the landowners who were preserving it and waiting patiently to see a plan that would benefit the community of Rockport. And other developers just failed because of the financial challenges of developing this raw land. The Rockport Harborfront is a brownfield, raw, undeveloped, without the needed infrastructure to be able to start building.
There you go. Yep.
So there is no bulkhead, there's not adequate drainage, no curbs, no streets, and there are not adequate utilities on the property. There are only the dilapidated ruins of an old bulkhead that has crumbled into the water and old trash metal from the remains of a Ricego boat lift that needs to be removed and discarded. There are some environmental challenges like creosote wood that need to be hauled away and a jagged edge to the waterfront that needs straightening out by constructing a new bulkhead and adding fill dirt behind it that is very costly to do. 2 years ago, Doak and I started developing a plan that would first benefit the community and be good for the future of Rockport. We envisioned that the best use of this property would be a multi-use development with the continuation of the downtown city grid, connecting the current downtown through to the water. We envision a boardwalk, waterfront restaurants, retail shopping, outdoor spaces, and tastefully designed downtown living that would be quaint and coastal, current in style, but wouldn't be too modern or clash with the look and feel of the downtown historic district. We plan the downtown streets to continue through the property and ending at the water's edge with a 25 to 30 foot wide boardwalk along the entire waterfront. Our vision aligns in a big way with the Heritage District overlay plan for this property. The Heritage District plan requires the developer of this property to make certain improvements like the continuation of city streets and the boardwalk. This master plan is by no means our final plans, but it is a feasibility study designed by Stephen Levy of Levy Dykema Architects, who helped us to plan out our vision in alignment with the Heritage District plan. Stephen grew up in Rockport and has been instrumental in helping us form our vision. You can see how the streets continue through the property and end at the boardwalk, and in the center is a large public park. The main thing I want to emphasize on this site is the streets that we are planning and the park and the promenades, which are all public spaces. The building part of the development sites are in red, but they may change in shape or configuration. That's just the location of where we have buildings as opposed to where the city blocks meet the streets. So let's walk through our vision of the property. We envision families and kids walking along the boardwalk. We envision people sitting and dining together at the waterfront restaurants. And we envision enjoying a glass of wine overlooking the beautiful harbor waters. We envision the grounds of this property providing full access to the public. Imagine an open green space, a public park with playscapes, splash pads, and family-friendly activities. We plan to collaborate with Rockport Center for the Arts to place public art sculptures along the trails of the park and boardwalk, and a pavilion for music and events at the water's edge. We envision this because we know that this property should never be developed for private residential use only. This property is at the core of Rockport's heart and culture, and we believe the community deserves to have access to it. We don't want this property to be another private development that is only accessible for private residents and homeowners, not for this property. We have not completed a full feasibility study for the navigation district planned, but we are planning on starting due diligence for that property, which will include a boutique hotel and other retail development on their property. These are our initial concept renderings for the future hotel. So we first started with our vision of what's best for Rockport, and then we spent 2 years figuring out how to make it work financially. We learned quickly why all of the previous developers had only made plans to make it a private residential development. That's because this land is so expensive to develop and install infrastructure on it that the only way to make the financial model even pencil is to max out density of private townhomes and condos. But we were still determined not to do that. We stuck to our vision. We planned for the residential condos to be low density, planning the first floor of most of the residential buildings to be designated for retail and restaurants, which will make the entire property have a very public feel to it. We planned for almost 2 acres at the center of it to be an open public park space. 67% of the land in our plan is allocated for public space. With the costs of sticking to our vision, along with the great infrastructure expense of extending the city grid and only going up to 3 stories, which is the max height, we learned that this development is not financially possible, except with one solution, and that is a tax increment reinvestment zone. A TIRZ is the key to being able to develop this property and is the key to us accomplishing this and keeping our commitment to our community. I ask you to kindly invest the time to learn what a TIRZ is. No, we are not asking for taxes out of anyone else's pocket. It is not a giveaway to a developer who is using it for pure profit. A TIRZ is the best instrument in which developers can partner with the city and have the developer invest in the public improvements, accomplish needed infrastructure, and then get reimbursed over time for those public improvements, with the reimbursement only coming off of property taxes paid from that exact development. A TIRZ is the best incentive for responsible, thoughtful, and forward planning development. If a TIRZ isn't in place, developers have to plan their developments on profit only. But with a TIRZ, there is an incentive for responsible and community-minded development. This is a slide of the property showing in yellow all the spaces in our development that are legally eligible for TIRZ reimbursement. As I mentioned, 67% of the acreage in our preliminary plan is allocated for public space. With a TIRZ, the developer pays up front for the infrastructure costs, and then the TIRZ reimburses the costs to build out the public spaces that we believe already belong to the community of Rockport. It doesn't reimburse our income generating improvements, but only the infrastructure and public spaces. Here are some eligible expenses that our development is looking for with the TIRZ. These are legally allowed expenses in a TIRZ. Drainage pipes, seawalls, bulkhead, streets, curbs, boardwalk, sidewalks, street lamps, public park space improvements, public park landscaping, playscapes and splash pads, park benches, railing around property, promenades, and other public improvements. Expenses not legally eligible are condos, townhomes, interiors of buildings, retail stores, income generating buildings. A TIRZ for the downtown promotes responsible development, partnership with the city, advanced infrastructure planning, community-minded development, future planning, flood prevention, and the reimbursements are calculated by a negotiated split off property tax from the same plan improvements and don't dip into anyone else's pocket. Without a TIRZ, development will be profit-only driven development, lack of planning, lack of coordination with the city, and balancing commercial versus residential. We already have too much residential and not enough commercial. And cities can lack funds to pay for infrastructure, and there may be no improvements to pay the property tax in the first place. So lastly, I want to address what we all went through last week. Living in South Rockport, Joke and I are keenly aware of the flooding that occurs downtown. You can see on this slide where the water intrusion comes in as a small river from the North Harborfront property and floods the downtown by the Art Center. A TIRZ will not only create tax revenue to solve drainage problems, but it can be set up to have a specific percentage allocated to help with these types of infrastructure solutions. The property tax income that comes from improvements that otherwise wouldn't be built, and the funds can be allocated into long-term drainage solutions. On Water Street in our neighborhood, a lack of a seawall creates water intrusion points and floods South Rockport. Advanced planning and public-private partnerships are great instruments to be able to access funding for long-term solutions for these types of problems. What is the predictable, probable future if our development doesn't happen? One, no change. The land could continue to sit there, erosion and flooding will continue to occur in the downtown. Continued imbalance, Rockport could continue to having more private residential development and not enough commercial. Imbalance will continue. And eventually the harborfront will be developed. If our planned development doesn't happen, other developers will try to get a hold of the property and most likely build a high-density residential private waterfront development, which would, in my opinion, waste the opportunity that this beautiful property presents for the community and for the city. Other developers might not take into consideration the future of Rockport and just want to maximize the density of the development for profit only. Can you change the next slide? The current status of our development is that we have done preliminary planning and spent 2 years on pre-development, including architectural master plan, concept renderings, and high-level planning, but there is much left to do. We have the vast harborfront under contract and an executed letter of intent with the navigation district for a ground lease on their property. The site plan may change a bit as we proceed, but this is generally what we want to build. Doak and I are driving the vision, but we have put together a great development team that have people on it with more than 30 years of development experience. We also have some highly experienced potential partners who have been successful at coastal development, but in order to solidify those relationships with JV partnerships and move forward with our plans, we need to know what the level of TIRZ partnership will be to see this full vision through. Assuming we can get the support, you can count on us to move forward to accomplish our vision. If it isn't for the TIRZ, the harborfront properties would never be developed in this kind of way, because our development requires such a large infrastructure project for the benefit of the public and not solely for private development. And tax revenue from our improvements will be what pays the development back for it. I hope you will stand with us to accomplish our vision and then stand again on this property with us in the future and celebrate what we will have created together for our community.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and let John talk.
Okay.
I couldn't use my glasses. Mayor, City Councilman, and ladies, my name is John Jackson, and I'm a fifth-generation full-time resident who lives at 312 Olympic Drive here in Rockport. Given that tenure and family legacy, I have a unique perspective for supporting the agenda item establishing a TIRZ. The TIRZ will finally encourage development of private property in Rockport Harborfront land, which will also provide significant public infrastructure. My perspective is unique because my family owned and operated a multi-generational business on this site from 1906 to 1990 for 84 years. Our family roots were planted here in 1888, and I am the last surviving Jackson heir to that legacy. 3 generations of us owned and operated Jackson Seafood on the harbor. The primary business consisted of a fleet of Gulf shrimp trawlers, an unloading facility, an ice plant, a fuel dock, a net shop, marine hardware store, and covered boat stalls and wharves. Unfortunately, the shrimping industry had a severe downturn in the 80s, and the closing of our business marked the end of an era. Our exit strategy was twofold: selling the land to Rockport Harborfront LP, which was owned primarily by the Bass family from Fort Worth. Number 2, the sale of our shrimp boat fleet, after which I started my second career as a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley. And almost 20 years later, I published a book in 2011, Taking the Tide, which chronicled that journey. We were fortunate in finding a willing buyer for our Rockport waterfront acreage in the Bass family. That eventual sale occurred after I spent several years developing a vision for the transformation of our industrial site by visiting successful waterfront developments across the country in favor of a multi-use waterfront development very similar to what you'll be seeing today. Several prospective developers approached the Basses over the last 34 years, but none of them materialized for various reasons, in my opinion, because of the size and the scope and the cost of achieving it, which likely made it a risky or questionable investment. But now I think the chances are much better for 4 reasons. 1, the principals are full-time residents in Rockport and have spent 2 years of due diligence working with the Basses and are currently under contract with them. Number 2, they're seeking a TIRZ with the city, which, if achieved, will substantially improve their chances of succeeding. 3, they have a letter of intent with the navigation district to negotiate a long-term lease to develop the southern portion of the property in conjunction with the northern Bass portion on the harborfront. And most importantly, they have a personal goal and genuine passion in doing what is best for the city of Rockport, and not just for financial reward. I truly believe that attitude and passion is one of the reasons that Basses have blessed them so far, because they too have a history of doing what's right for Rockport. Today, you have already learned more about how a TIRZ works and how it can be a major benefit to the city by providing private capital to finance significant, necessary public city infrastructure without having to raise taxes on its citizens. The public benefits will include, among others, such things as a boardwalk for public access to the waterfront, public park green space, public parking, drainage, streetscapes,
all of which will likely encourage enhancement of existing other infrastructure within the TIRZ corridor. Along with that, an enhanced quality of life, other downtown redevelopment, job opportunities, shopping options and local sales, and visual access to the waterfront. At the present time, there are over 400 TIRZs in Texas under Chapter 311 of the tax code, which creates and regulates TIRZ economic development tool. Some examples you've heard about today, but others are Mineral Wells, Navasota, Riverville, Waco, LaPorte, Houston. As I said earlier, the most critical reason why I think that prior attempts to develop this property have not progressed was that they did not have a TIRZ approved and established up front. Simply put, you can sum it all up in just 4 words. If not but for. If not but for having a TIRZ in place, this development cannot happen. We've waited almost 35 years for this. Let's open the TIRZ door so it will happen. Thank you.
Luis?
What can I do from back here?
Absolutely.
That's great. I'm just going to speak from the heart, and like I usually do. And my name is Luis Puron. I'm the Executive Director of the Rockport Center for the Arts. And I'm here for 2 reasons, primarily as a private citizen, but also as the Director of the Arts Center. As a private citizen, I'm always constantly concerned for the quality of life of our community. As the Director of the Arts Center, we have the largest, most recent investment in the downtown area. As you all know, in 2016, I've been here about 10 years. In 2016, we invested over $1 million to acquire land in the downtown area. We knew that building in the downtown area was not going to be easy. So I really applaud Doug and Scarlett Embrey for their tenacity to try to develop the land, because it is not easy to develop in the downtown area. Our project had significant challenges, but in 2022, we completed construction of a wonderful art center facility and invested a total of about $12.5 million in doing so. As the Director of the Arts Center, I'm also concerned in the protection of our investment. As Scarlett clearly elucidated in her presentation, we had some major flooding in the downtown area. So I am here to, wholeheartedly support the creation of a TIRZ in the downtown area so that this project can be developed. As you already heard Scarlett say, there's 11 acres of land in the Rockport Harborfront LP property, and about 5 acres of land in the navigation property. Those 2 entities worked very hard and invested a lot of professional development fees, legal fees, in order to separate those lands, that were commingled for so many years. The time is now to invest in the downtown area, and I think this is a great project. I think thinking of this project and having over 65% of it be public spaces is very exciting. It's also a very art-centric project, which is a very strong passion for me and everybody that is a supporter of the Rockport Center for the Arts. So, Mayor, Council, as you consider this proposal in upcoming meetings, I highly encourage you as a private citizen, but also as a Director of the Arts Center and a leader in our community to pass a TIRZ.
Thank you.
Tommy Moore, excuse me, Aransas County Navigation District. I went back and started looking at where we got, and when we started this, the first maps we exchanged with Bill Baker were in 2010. And when I first started my conversations with Bill Baker, who's the president of Fine Line Development Company, one of his things was, Mr. Bass said to make a nice development. He also said, we're not going to develop it. We're going to look for a developer. And they brought these things together. It took 6 years, I think, to finally get it done. And of course, you know what happened in 2017 with our little wrench in our works. But all throughout bringing this process together and the land swap agreement and all of the agreements to develop the infrastructure, it was all about public benefit. The district took less land so that we could have a boardwalk the entire way, and it sounds like you're gonna expand it even more than the 20 feet that is in the agreement. We're moving forward. When I wrote a note that to Scarlett that the LOI had been approved, and let's start talking, it kind of hit me how big a deal this was and how hard we worked. And to me, it looks like the only way to go is up, because it doesn't take anything away. And as far as anything being not successful, I think a piece of property like this is guaranteed to grow and benefit the community. And that's been our plan moving forward. Scarlett and Doug have been vetted by the Basses. We will do some more vetting as we go, but right now it's all systems go, and we're all real happy about it. So please move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moore.
Okay, so Mayor and Council will have future discussions about this. You'll see it on future agendas, probably maybe one more work session. We'll need to have an executive session discussion. And of course, if you have any questions for Travis, if y'all want to funnel those through me, we'll be happy to get those answered for you. And that's it for today.
Can you share the PowerPoint with us?
Absolutely.
So,
Okay, Sam, share so if you don't.
Well, and we'll put them on the web. We have them at the time of the distribution. So, if Bob will email those to you guys, to all the council, I'll appreciate it. And then they'll be on the website tomorrow.
Thanks to everyone for being here. Thank you so much. Y'all have a good day. We're adjourned.